That phone call was just to ask about a warranty paper, but my dad forgot to hang up. I heard every word. They spoke about me like I was a bad debt. I did not scream. I stayed quiet long enough to turn a $980,000 home into a trap they never saw coming. They think I disappeared because I was weak. The truth is I left because I was finally awake. My name is Lila Bishop. I am 34 years old. And up until 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in October, I was a good daughter. I was the kind of daughter who apologized when someone else bumped into me. I was the kind of daughter who kept a mental inventory of my parents' allergies, their favorite brands of coffee, and the precise dates of their medical appointments. I was the keeper of the peace, the shock absorber for the family drama, and the reliable checkbook whenever an unexpected bill appeared. I was standing in the kitchen of the house my grandmother, Margot Hale, had left me. The house was a sprawling mid-century ranch in a neighborhood that had recently become very expensive. The appraisal had come in last week at $980,000. It was a number that felt abstract to me, like Monopoly money. To me, this house was just the smell of dried lavender and the specific creak of the floorboard in the hallway. It was the only place I had ever felt safe. But safety has a way of springing leaks. For the last 3 days, the kitchen faucet had been dripping. It was a slow, rhythmic torture. Plip, plip, plip. I had tried tightening the handle. I had tried ignoring it. Finally, I decided to find the warranty paperwork. I knew my father, Darren, had organized the utility files the last time he and my mother stayed over. He had a system for everything, a rigid way of organizing the world that made him feel powerful. If I looked in the wrong place, I would never hear the end of it. So, I made the mistake. I called him. My phone screen glowed with the word Dad. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the preemptive anxiety that always accompanied our interactions. I cleared my throat, pitching my voice to be cheerful and non-confrontational. He picked up on the 4th ring. Yeah. His voice was loud, competing with a wall of background noise. I could hear the distinct clatter of heavy silverware on ceramic plates and the low hum of conversation. They were out at lunch, probably at that bistro downtown where a salad cost $25. I wondered briefly who was paying for that. Hey, Dad, I said, keeping it light. Sorry to bother you. I am looking for the warranty box for the kitchen fixtures. The faucet is leaking again. Do you remember where you put it? For Christ's sake, Lila, he snapped. The harshness in his voice was immediate. I am eating. Can't this wait? I just did not want to tear the garage apart if I did not have to, I said. Just tell me which shelf. Blue bin, top shelf, left side, behind the paint cans, he recited, the words firing out like bullets. Use your eyes for once. Okay, thanks, Dad. Enjoy lunch. Yeah, he grunted. I heard the phone shuffle, the sound of plastic scraping against fabric or a table surface. I waited for the line to go dead. I waited for the screen to go dark. But the line did not disconnect. He must have set the phone down on the table, screen up, thinking he had hit the red button, or maybe he just did not care enough to check. I stood there in my grandmother's sunlit kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear. My thumb hovered over the end call button. I should have pressed it. I should have hung up and gone to the garage. I should have continued living my life in the comfortable, foggy denial I had built for myself over 3 decades. But I did not hang up. Through the speaker, the sounds of the restaurant became clearer. I heard a waiter ask if everything was okay. I heard my father grunt an affirmative. Then, I heard my mother's voice. Lynn Bishop. Her voice was soft, melodic, the kind of voice that sounded sweet until you realized the words were laced with arsenic. Who was that? She asked. Lila, my father said. He said my name with a heavy exhale, as if the very syllables exhausted him. Asking about some damn warranty paper. She cannot do anything herself. Helpless. She is always calling. My mother sighed. I could picture her perfectly, shaking her head, adjusting the silk scarf around her neck, playing the role of the long-suffering matriarch. It is always something. What does she want now? Just whining about the faucet, Dad said. There was the sound of glass hitting the table. ice cubes clinking. He was drinking something hard. I told her where it was. There was a pause. I stood frozen. The sun was streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. But I felt cold. A deep, permeating cold that started in my stomach and spread to my fingertips. Then my father spoke again. His voice was lower now, confidential, the tone of a conspirator. "She is a burden, Lynn. She really is." The sentence hung in the air between them, and it traveled miles through the cellular network to slam into my chest. "She is a burden." I did not breathe. I did not blink. "I know, Darren," my mother soothed him. "I know, but we have to be patient. We have to play the long game here." "I am tired of the game," he grumbled. "I am 64 years old. I deserve to relax. I deserve to live in a house where I do not have to ask permission to move a damn chair." "You know the plan," Mom said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was still terrifyingly audible. "We just need to get through the next few months. We get her to sign the deed over for tax purposes or estate planning. We tell her it is to protect her. She does not understand these things. She is simple that way." "She is stubborn," Dad argued. "She holds on to this place like Margot is still haunting it." "She is not stubborn," Mom corrected him. "She is guilty. That is her button. Darren, you just have to press it. Remind her of how much we sacrificed. Remind her of your back. Remind her of the medical bills we paid when she was 7. "That was 30 years ago," Dad muttered. "It does not matter," Mom said. I could hear the smile in her voice. "Interest compounds. Guilt compounds. We tell her we are struggling. We tell her we are worried about our retirement. We tell her that if she really loved us, she would want us to be secure. She will fold. She always folds." I gripped the edge of the granite counter so hard my knuckles turned white. My entire life was being deconstructed over a lunch special. Every moment of love, every hug, every "I am proud of you" was being stripped away to reveal the transaction underneath. They did not see me as a daughter. They saw me as an investment vehicle. They saw me as a retirement plan. "The market is high right now," Dad said, his mouth full of food. "This place, it is sitting on a gold mine, nearly $1 million. We could sell it, buy a condo in Florida, and still have $600,000 left over to live on." "We will not sell it immediately," Mom cautioned. "We move in properly first, make it ours. Then we convince her it is too big for her to manage alone. We tell her she needs something smaller, a condo. We take the house. It is the natural order of things. Darren, parents take care of children, and then children give back." "Give back," Dad scoffed. "She owes us everything. If it were not for us, she would be nothing." My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone against the wall. I wanted to drive down there and flip their table over, but I did not. Something shifted in my brain. It was a physical sensation, like a gear snapping into place. The shock was receding, replaced by a clarity so sharp it cut. I was not a daughter anymore. I was a target, and targets do not scream. Targets do not cry. Targets survive. I pulled the phone away from my ear. Just an inch. I looked at the screen. The call timer was at 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I tapped the icon for the speakerphone, setting it down gently on the counter. Then, I opened the voice recorder app on my phone. I had installed it months ago for work notes and never used it. I hit the red circle. Record. "I am going to bring up the knee surgery again," Mom was saying. "Next time we go over there, I will limp a little. You mentioned how the insurance did not cover the rehab. Say we are dipping into savings." "She paid for the trip to Italy last year," Dad said. "Maybe she thinks that was enough. That was a birthday gift." Mom dismissed it. "That does not count toward the debt. The debt is life. Darren, she has a life because of us. $1 million house is a fair trade." "She is a burden," Dad repeated, as if he liked the taste of the word. "But a burden with assets." I watched the waveform on the recording app spike and valley with their voices. Every word was being captured, every insult, every plot point. They were outlining their strategy, step by step, unaware that the enemy was listening. They planned to come over this weekend. They planned to start the conversation about consolidating assets. They planned to use my own love for them as a weapon to strip me bare. I looked around the kitchen. This was my house. Margot had left it to me, specifically me. The will had been clear. To my granddaughter, Lila, who understands the value of a sanctuary. She had known, even then. She must have known what they were. She had tried to protect me from the grave, and I had almost let them in. I had almost handed them the keys because I was desperate for them to look at me with something other than disappointment. "Wait until the bill comes," Dad said. "I am going to call her back. Tell her I forgot to mention I need to borrow $2,000 for the car transmission. Do not push too hard today," Mom warned. Let the burden comment sit if she heard it. No, she did not hear it. "You hung up." "I think I did," Dad said. "Whatever. If she calls back, we just say the signal was bad." "Let us get dessert," Mom said. "We have something to celebrate. The plan is in motion." I reached out and ended the call. The silence that rushed back into the kitchen was deafening. It was heavier than the noise of the restaurant. I stood there, staring at the phone. My hand was trembling, just a little. Not from fear, from rage. A cold, quiet rage that felt like ice water in my veins. I looked at the file I had just created. Recording 001. Duration 6 minutes and 14 seconds. I renamed it The Truth. I did not cry. I realized with a start that I had no tears left for them. They had taken my money, my time, and my energy for years. They were not going to take my tears, and they were certainly not going to take my home. I walked over to the sink. The faucet was still dripping. Plip, plip, plip. It wasn't just a leak anymore. It was a metronome. It was counting down. But it wasn't counting down the time until I lost my house. It was counting down the time until they lost everything. My father thought I was a burden. My mother thought I was simple. They thought I was the same soft, pliable girl they had molded for 3 decades. They were wrong. The Lila Bishop who had dialed the phone 5 minutes ago was gone. She had died between hello and she is a burden. The woman standing in the kitchen now was someone else entirely. I watched the water gather at the lip of the faucet. It swelled, heavy and full, fighting gravity for a split second before it let go. Drop. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of dried lavender and old wood. I was awake, I was aware, and I was in possession of the most dangerous thing in the world, the truth. I picked up the phone again. I did not call them back. Instead, I opened my calendar. I marked the date. Then I opened my banking app. I checked the balance. Then I opened the Notes app and started a new list. I titled it Eviction Strategy. The water dripped again. It sounded loud in the quiet house. It sounded like a judge's gavel hitting the sound block. Plip, game on. Most people think rent is something you pay to a landlord on the first of the month. They think it is a transaction of currency for square footage. But when you grow up in a house like mine, you learn very early on that rent comes in many forms. In the Bishop household, rent was paid in silence. It was paid in the swallowing of your own opinions until they dissolved in your stomach like acid. It was paid in a constant, breathless gratitude that you existed at all. My childhood was defined by the architecture of walking on eggshells. We lived in a working-class box in the suburbs, a house that always smelled faintly of my father's industrial laundry and my mother's nervous cooking. Dinner was the centerpiece of our dysfunction. Every night at 6 o'clock, we sat at a laminate table that wobbled slightly on the left side. The television was always off, not out of respect for conversation, but because my father demanded absolute focus on his day. Darren Bishop worked hard. I will never take that away from him, but he wore his labor like a martyr's crown. He would sit at the head of the table, his hands still stained with the grease or dust of the job site, and he would look at the food my mother placed in front of him with a critical eye. If the meat was dry, he sighed. If the meat was perfect, he said nothing. I learned to eat without making sound. I learned that the clink of a fork against a plate could trigger a lecture that lasted 40 minutes. The theme was always the same. "You have no idea," he would say, pointing a knife at me while I stared at my mashed potatoes. "You have no idea how much this costs. The electricity to cook this, the gas to heat the room. You sit there, warm and fed, and you do not think about the sweat it took to put that roof over your head. Be grateful. Lila, just be grateful." Gratitude was not a feeling in our house. It was a mandate. It was a tax. I became a meteorologist of my father's moods. I could tell the weather of the evening by the way the front door opened. If the handle turned slowly and the door clicked shut, it was a safe night. If the door was thrown open and slammed, rattling the family photos on the hallway wall, it was a storm. I would retreat to my room, making myself as small as possible, turning the pages of my homework books with painstaking slowness so as not to make a rustle. My mother, Lynn, was a different kind of danger. If Dad was the hurricane, Mom was the humidity that suffocated you before you realized you could not breathe. She did not yell. She maneuvered. I learned that when her voice pitched up an octave, when she called me sweetie or baby girl with that sugary lilt, she was not expressing affection. She was positioning herself. "Sweetie," she would say, standing in my doorway, "your father is in a mood. Why do you not go downstairs and just listen to him? Just let him vent. Do it for me." She used me as a human shield. She traded my peace for hers. And afterwards, she would hug me and say we were a team. But I always felt like the teammate who got sent onto the field to take the tackle while the quarterback stayed on the bench. There was only one place where the air was clear. Every Saturday morning, my grandmother, Margot Hale, would pick me up in her ancient, pristine sedan. Margot was my mother's mother, but they were nothing alike. My mother was soft edges and passive aggression. Margot was steel-wrapped in cashmere. She lived in a mid-century ranch house on the other side of town, a place that smelled of dried lavender and beeswax. When I stepped into Margot's house, the knot in my chest would loosen. There was no shouting here. There was no demand for gratitude. There was jazz playing low on the stereo. And there was always a bowl of fresh fruit on the counter, which I was allowed to eat without asking. Margot did not treat me like a child. She treated me like a small adult who needed training for a war she could see coming. She did not teach me how to bake cookies or knit. She taught me how to read a bank statement. I remember sitting at her kitchen island, the same island where I would later record my parents plotting against me when I was 12 years old. Margot placed a heavy ledger in front of me. "Look at this, Lila," she said, tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail. "This is freedom. Money is not about buying things. It is about buying the right to say no. If you have your own money, no one can tell you where to stand or how to speak." She taught me about compound interest. She taught me about property taxes. She taught me that owning a home was the only true security in a world that wanted to rent you your own life. One afternoon, while we were weeding her garden, she gave me the most important piece of advice I would ever receive. I had been complaining about a promise I made to a friend that I did not want to keep. Margot stopped, wiping the dirt from her hands. She looked me dead in the eye. "Lila, listen to me," she said, her voice low and serious. "Never sign anything when your heart is shaking. If you feel guilty, put the pen down. If you feel scared, put the pen down. You only sign when you are cold, when you are steady. Emotions are for people. Contracts are for paper. Do not mix them." I did not fully understand her then. I thought she was just being dramatic, but I stored it away, like a seed in winter, waiting for the ground to thaw. Margot died on a Tuesday. It was a massive stroke. Quick, merciless. She was gone before the ambulance reached the hospital. I was 29 years old. My world collapsed. She was the only person who had ever looked at me and seen me, not a utility or a reflection. I cried until my throat was raw. I cried for the loss of her, and I cried because I knew, instinctively, that my shield was gone. My parents did not cry much. They were busy. They were busy calculating. The reading of the will took place 2 weeks later. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson, sat behind a large oak desk and adjusted his glasses. My parents sat on the leather sofa, holding hands. My father was wearing his best suit, but he looked uncomfortable, like he was ready to argue over a bill. My mother was wearing black, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. I sat in the chair in the corner, numb. To my daughter, Lynn, and her husband, Darren, Mr. Henderson read, his voice monotone. I leave the sum of $50,000. My father squeezed my mother's hand. I saw a flicker of disappointment cross his face. $50,000 was a lot of money, but it was not a fortune. It was enough for a new car and a few vacations, but it was not life-changing. And, Mr. Henderson continued, turning the page, to my granddaughter, Lila Bishop, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes the property at 420 Cedar Lane, fully paid off, along with the contents of the home and the residual savings account to cover maintenance and taxes for 5 years. The room went silent, a vacuum of sound. My father's head snapped toward me. My mother stopped dabbing her eyes. Excuse me, my father said. His voice was not sad. It was sharp. Read that again. The house is left to Lila Bishop, the lawyer repeated. That house is worth nearly $1 million. My father said. He said the number like it was an accusation. Lila is young. She does not know how to handle that kind of asset. Surely Margot meant for us to administer it for her. The will is explicit, Mr. Henderson said. The title transfers to Lila immediately. There are no trustees. My mother looked at me. Her eyes were wide, betraying a mix of shock and something that looked terrifyingly like hunger. Lila, she whispered, did you know about this? I shook my head. No, I said, and it was the truth. Margot had never told me. She had just prepared me. The ride home was excruciating. My father drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. My mother stared out the window. When we got to their house, the house of gratitude and eggshells, my father finally spoke. Well, he said, turning off the engine. It stays in the family. That is what matters. It is a family asset. That was the first time I heard the phrase, family asset. In the months that followed, I moved into Margot's house. It was strange to live among her things without her, but it was also the first time in my life I had breathed freely. I slept in the guest room because I could not bring myself to take her master suite. I kept her garden. I paid the bills with the money she left. My parents, meanwhile, burned through their $50,000 with alarming speed. They bought a boat they used twice. They went to Vegas. They repaved their driveway. Within 8 months, the money was gone, and the narrative began to shift. They started coming over on weekends. At first, they called. Then, they just showed up. My father would walk around the property, inspecting the fence, kicking the tires of the lawnmower. This place needs a lot of work, he would say, standing in the middle of my kitchen. You cannot handle the gutters, Lila. I will have to come over and do it. It is a lot for a single girl. I can hire someone. Dad, I would say. Don't waste money, he would snap. Family helps family. Besides, I need to keep an eye on the investment. The investment. My mother took a different approach. She would come over and rearrange the furniture. She would talk about how cramped their house was, how the stairs were getting hard on Dad's knees. It is so nice to have so much space here, she would say, running her hand over the velvet sofa. Ideally, a house this size is for a whole family. It feels a bit empty with just you. Doesn't it? She was planting seeds, weeds, really. She wanted me to feel like an imposter in my own home. She wanted me to feel like I was hoarding resources while they suffered, and for a long time, it worked. I told myself they were grieving. I told myself that losing Margot had unmoored them, and they were just trying to find a way to feel secure again. I made excuses for their entitlement. I cooked them dinner in my house, and I let my father sit at the head of Margot's table. I let him criticize the roast beef. I let him tell me to be grateful. I rationalized it. They are my parents. I thought, they raised me. They struggled. Maybe I do owe them. Maybe it is selfish of me to have this 3-bedroom house all to myself while they worry about their retirement. I built a cage out of my own guilt and walked right into it. I handed them the lock. But looking back now, from the other side of the fire, I see the truth. It was never about grief. Margot knew them. That is why she skipped a generation. She knew that if she gave them the money, it would vanish. She knew that if she gave them the house, they would leverage it against debt. She gave it to me because she thought I was the firewall. She did not realize that a firewall is useless if the operator opens the port from the inside. I spent 3 years letting them erode my boundaries. I paid for their emergencies. I let them store their winter clothes in my spare closets. I gave them a key, just for emergencies, which turned into them letting themselves in to borrow milk or check the mail. I was trying to buy their love. I thought if I shared enough, if I was generous enough, they would finally look at me and say, "Thank you, Lila. You are a good daughter." But the bucket had a hole in the bottom. The realization did not come all at once. It was a slow accumulation of small cuts. It was the way my father bragged to his friends about our property while I stood right there. It was the way my mother asked me to sign a small loan application as a co-signer because their credit was a little bruised, and when I refused, she didn't speak to me for a month, and then came the phone call, the call that I recorded in part 1. That call was the final piece of the puzzle, when my father said, "She is a burden," and my mother talked about compounding interest. It retroactively illuminated my entire life. They did not see a daughter. They saw a savings bond that had finally matured. They had put in the food, the shelter, the minimum required effort to keep me alive, and now they were ready to cash out. The love I had been chasing was just the customer service face of a bank teller waiting for a withdrawal. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Margot had taught me to be strong, and I understood. I was not being loved. I was being harvested. The house was not a home to them. It was a $980,000 check that they felt entitled to cash because they had once changed my diapers. I thought about Margot's advice. Never sign when your heart is shaking. My heart wasn't shaking anymore. It was still. It was perfectly, terrifyingly still. I looked at the walls of the house. I looked at the spot on the floor where Margot used to stand and dance to her jazz records. This was not the family home. This was my home. And the tenants, the ones who paid in guilt and collected in pain, were about to be evicted. I walked over to the calendar on the wall. I turned the page to next month. The lease was up. The invasion did not begin with a battering ram. It began with a beige La-Z-Boy recliner from 1998. It happened on a Sunday morning, 3 months before the phone call that changed everything. I was drinking coffee in my living room, admiring the way the morning light hit the hardwood floors that I had just spent $2,000 refinishing. The house was peaceful. It was mine. Then the front door opened. I had given my parents a key for emergencies a year prior, a decision that now felt like handing a burglar the combination to the safe. There was no knock, just the sound of the lock turning and the heavy breathing of 2 people struggling with a cumbersome object. "Pivot! Darren! Pivot!" My mother's voice shrilled from the entryway. I set my mug down and walked into the hall. There they were, wrestling a massive, overstuffed recliner through my front door. The fabric was a faded, sad beige, stained with years of coffee spills and hair oil. It smelled of their basement mildew and old newspapers. "Dad." "Mom," I asked, blinking. "What are you doing?" "Bringing the chair over." My father grunted, his face red with exertion. He didn't look at me. He was focused on navigating the doorframe without scratching his precious cargo, though he didn't seem to mind banging it against my freshly painted wainscoting. "Watch the trim." "Lynn." "I am watching it," she snapped back. "Why are you bringing a chair here?" I asked, stepping back to avoid being run over. "Your father needs somewhere comfortable to sit when we visit," my mother explained, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. "That sofa of yours is too low. It is bad for his back. We talked about this." We had not talked about this. I had never agreed to turn my mid-century modern living room into a storage unit for their discarded furniture. I have chairs, I said. I have the Eames chair. It is very comfortable. That thing, my father scoffed. Finally dropping the heavy recliner with a thud onto my hardwood floor, I winced. That is a museum piece, not a chair. A man needs padding, Lila, padding. He proceeded to drag the beige monstrosity into the center of the room. He didn't place it in a corner. He didn't angle it toward the television. He planted it smack in the middle of the open floor plan, blocking the flow from the kitchen to the dining area. He sat down in it, pulled the lever, and the footrest shot up with a rusty screech. He sighed, interlacing his fingers behind his head. Now, he said, closing his eyes, this feels like home. It was a flag planting. He was Neil Armstrong, and my living room was the moon. He had staked his claim. The chair was not just a seat. It was a physical manifestation of his presence that remained even when he left. It was a reminder, this is not really your space. It is ours. From that day on, the boundaries did not just blur, they dissolved. The suggestions started as low-level background noise. My mother would walk through the house, trailing a finger along the walls I had painted a soft, calming sage green. It is a bit dark, isn't it? She would say, tilting her head. Makes the room feel small. If you ever want to sell, buyers prefer neutral tones. An off-white would open this up. We should paint it this weekend. I like the green. Mom, I would say. Well, it is your house, she would reply, her tone implying exactly the opposite. But when you are part of a family, you have to think about the collective value. You do not want to lower the equity with bad taste. They never offered to pay for the paint. They never offered to pay for the refinished floors or the new water heater I installed when the old one burst. But they had an unlimited budget for opinions. They were shareholders with zero investment, but 100% voting rights. The rhetoric about the deed began subtly. It was always couched in the language of protection, of caring for me. We were sitting on the patio one evening, Dad in a lawn chair he had also brought over. Mom sipping wine I had bought. My father started, looking out at the garden. I was talking to Bob from the union. He told me about a guy whose daughter got sued because someone tripped on her sidewalk. Lost the house, just like that. I felt the tension coil in my stomach. I have insurance, Dad. Insurance finds loopholes, he said darkly. You are a single woman, Lila. You are a target. If this house was in a trust, or a joint tenancy with us, it would be safer, harder to seize. We are just thinking of your future. And it makes things easier for inheritance, my mother added, chipping in smoothly. God forbid something happens to you. Do you want the state to take it if our names are on it? The transition is seamless. It is just paperwork. Really. Peace of mind. Peace of mind. That was their favorite currency. But the exchange rate was extortionate. I almost broke. I almost said yes, just to make them stop looking at me with those worried, predatory eyes. I wanted to be the good daughter who trusted her parents. But Margot's voice was in my head. Don't sign when your heart is shaking. Instead of signing the deed, I bought them a vacation. It was a desperate, expensive attempt to buy my own freedom. I paid $8,000 for a 2-week cruise through the Mediterranean for their anniversary. I told myself it was a gift. The truth was, I wanted them out of my zip code. I wanted 14 days where I didn't have to defend my choice of throw pillows or explain why I hadn't mowed the lawn on a Tuesday. They took the tickets without a thank you. Well, my father said, looking at the itinerary, it is the least you could do. After all the years we didn't go anywhere because we were paying for your braces and your piano lessons. There it was, the invoice of childhood. My father had a way of weaponizing the past that was truly artistic. He could turn a memory of a family picnic into a lecture on his financial martyrdom. If it were not for us, he would say, gesturing around my kitchen as if he had built it with his own hands. Would you be where you are today? Would you have the credit score to maintain this place? We sacrificed our prime years so you could have a soft landing, and now you have it. Don't forget who built the runway. Lila. He made me feel like my entire existence was a debt I could never repay. Every success I had was actually theirs. Every failure was solely mine. The dynamic shifted to a point where I found myself seeking permission for purchases in my own home. I would be at a store, looking at a new blender, and I would hear my mother's voice. "Do you really need the deluxe model? That is $200? That is wasteful. I would buy the cheaper one, the one that broke in 6 months, just to avoid a conversation that wasn't even happening in real life." One afternoon, I bought a rug. It was a beautiful, hand-woven Persian rug I found at an estate sale. It was expensive, but I used my bonus from work. I laid it down in the hallway, feeling a spark of joy. My parents came over 2 hours later. My mother stopped at the door. She looked down at the rug. "What is this?" "I bought a rug," I said, feeling like a teenager caught with contraband. "How much?" my father asked from behind her. "It does not matter," I said. "I liked it." "It does matter," he said, stepping onto it with his muddy boots. "You are complaining about the cost of the roof repairs, but you have money for fancy rugs. This is why you need us to manage the finances. Lila, you have no priorities. You treat this house like a dollhouse." I rolled the rug up that night and put it in the attic. I told myself it was to keep it clean, but really, I hid it because I couldn't look at it without feeling shame. But the breaking point, the moment the domestic thriller turned from psychological to structural, happened on a Tuesday. A week before the phone call, I had come home early from work. A migraine had been splitting my head open since noon, a physical manifestation of the stress I was carrying. I parked my car down the street because a white van was blocking my driveway. Bates Construction. The side of the van read. I frowned. I hadn't called a contractor. I walked up the driveway, my temples throbbing. A man in a tool belt was standing on my porch, holding a clipboard, looking up at the roof. He was writing something down. "Can I help you?" I asked. The man turned. He looked friendly enough. A guy just doing his job. "Afternoon, ma'am. Just finishing up the estimate for the Master Suite addition." I froze. "The what?" "The addition," he said, tapping his clipboard. "Knocking out that back wall, extending the master bedroom, adding the ensuite with the jacuzzi tub. Big project." I stared at him. "I didn't request an estimate." The man looked confused. He flipped a page on his clipboard. "I have the work order right here. Met with the owner this morning. Nice guy? Older fella. Darren." The world tilted on its axis. "Darren," I repeated. My voice sounded hollow. "Yeah, Darren Bishop," the contractor said. "He walked me through it. Said he and his wife are moving in next month and need the extra space. Said the current master is too small for their bedroom set. He wanted the quote specifically for the demo work to start as soon as the permit's clear." I felt the blood drain from my face. My migraine vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp shock. My father had not just suggested they move in. He was soliciting construction bids. He was planning to knock down walls in my house. He was introducing himself as the owner. "Did he show you a deed?" I asked. The contractor laughed nervously. "No, ma'am. Usually, when a guy is standing in the kitchen drinking coffee and has the alarm code, I assume he owns the place. Is there a problem?" "I am the owner," I said. "Lila Bishop, Darren is my father. He does not own this house. He does not live here, and there will be no addition." The man's face went pale. "Oh, goodness. I am so sorry. He was very convincing. He talked about the property taxes. The zoning, he seemed to know everything." "He knows nothing," I said, my voice trembling with a rage I barely recognized. "Please leave, and if he calls you again, tell him the project is canceled." The contractor hurried to his van. I watched him drive away, leaving me standing on my driveway, staring at the house that was supposedly mine. I walked inside. The air felt different. It felt violated. I went to the kitchen. There were 2 coffee cups in the sink. One had lipstick on the rim, my mother's shade. They had been here. They had let themselves in with the emergency key while I was at work. They had met with a contractor. They had planned a renovation to accommodate their furniture, their lives, their bodies. in my space. They weren't just eroding boundaries, they were erasing me. I walked into the living room and looked at the beige recliner sitting in the center of the floor. It wasn't just a chair, it was a throne. My father didn't want a room to sleep in. He wanted the master suite. He wanted the title. He wanted to be the king of the castle that Margot had built for me. I realized then that they didn't care about the house. They didn't love the architecture or the garden or the memories. They hated this house because it represented the one thing they never gave me: independence. They needed the house because the house was power. And if they took the house, they took my power. They took the only thing that made me Lila Bishop, an adult woman, instead of Lila, the grateful, indebted child. I stood there for a long time. The silence of the house was not peaceful anymore. It was the silence of a battlefield before the first shot is fired. I didn't call them. I didn't scream. I went to the front door and engaged the deadbolt. It was a flimsy lock. I knew that now, a piece of metal against a battering ram. But as I stood there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the settling of the foundation, I knew one thing for certain. They were not moving in. They were not knocking down my walls. And the next time Darren Bishop introduced himself as the owner of this property, he was going to be holding a subpoena, not a coffee cup. I walked back to the kitchen, washed their cups, and put them away. I cleaned the sink. I wiped the counters. I erased the evidence of their presence. But I kept the business card the contractor had left on the porch railing. I stuck it to the fridge with a magnet. It was not a reminder to renovate. It was a reminder to arm myself. The war had started. I just hadn't realized I was fighting it until the enemy was already inside the gates. Measuring the drapes, I pressed play again. I was sitting at the kitchen island, the same spot where I had stood paralyzed hours earlier. But the sun had long since gone down. The house was dark, save for the blue-white glow of my laptop screen and the small amber light of the digital recorder app on my phone. I had transferred the file to my computer. I wanted to see the waveform. I wanted to see the shape of their betrayal. I put my noise-canceling headphones over my ears, creating a seal that shut out the hum of the refrigerator and the wind against the siding. I needed to hear everything. I needed to hear the breath between the lies. The timestamp on the recording read 12:34 post-meridian. My father's voice filled my head, clear and jagged, stripped of the background noise of the restaurant by the audio software I had just downloaded. "We do it the night we get back," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a schedule. "We don't give her time to think. We sit her down. The serious talk." "She hates the serious talk," my mother's voice replied. It was tinny, but the calculating tone was unmistakable. "She gets that look in her eyes, like a deer." "That is the point, Lynn," my father said. "Fear focuses the mind. We tell her the truth is ugly. We tell her we are drowning. We tell her the pension isn't enough." "Is it, my mother asked. There was a pause. "Is the pension enough?" "That is not the point," my father snapped. "Of course we have the pension. But why should we live on a fixed income when we have a liquid asset sitting on Cedar Lane? We raised her. We put the equity in. Now we take the equity out. It is a return on investment." I paused the track. A return on investment. I stared at the sound wave. A sharp spike of static. My childhood, my scraped knees, my graduation, the times they drove me to band practice, it was all just seed capital. And now they were looking at the harvest. I hit play again. "We have to make sure she understands the responsibility," my mother said. Her voice dropped to that conspiratorial whisper I knew so well. "We tell her that good daughters take care of their aging parents. We use the word burden again, but differently. We tell her we don't want to be a burden on her. So the best thing is for us to all be together, consolidate. If she refuses, she looks selfish. And she cannot handle looking selfish." My father grunted. "She is weak that way. You push a little. She cracks. Remember when she wanted to move to Chicago for that job, I told her you were sick. She stayed. She didn't even check the medical records. She just stayed." I felt a cold flush of nausea wash over me. That was 6 years ago. I had been offered a position as a junior architect in a firm in the city. It was my dream job. My father had called me the night before I was supposed to sign the lease, his voice trembling, saying Mom was having heart episodes, and they needed me close. I stayed. I turned down the job. My mother's heart had been fine. She had been gardening the next day. I had always suspected, but hearing it confirmed. Hearing them laugh about it was like swallowing glass. She feels guilty easily, my mother continued on the recording. It is her default setting. We just have to dial it up. Mention your back. Mention the stress. Tell her the doctor said you are at risk of a stroke if you do not reduce your financial stress. She will sign whatever we put in front of her just to stop the shaking. Speaking of signing, my father said. The audio shifted. He leaned in closer to the phone he had forgotten to hang up. I talked to Jimmy. I froze. James Jimmy O'Connell was an old drinking buddy of my father's. He worked in the county clerk's office. He was a man who had fixed a speeding ticket for me when I was 17, a favor that my father had held over my head for a decade. What did Jimmy say? My mother asked. He said if we bring the quitclaim deed in on a Friday afternoon, right before closing, he can push it through without the usual waiting period. He won't scrutinize the notary stamp too hard. As long as the signature looks close enough, it gets filed. By Monday morning, the title reflects the change. Just like that. Just like that, Dad said. He said to use the form aimed at adding family members for estate planning. It incurs less tax. Once our names are on it, 50-50, we are set. Next year, we force a partition sale if we want, or we just take out a home equity line of credit against it. We can pull out $300,000 cash and she cannot stop us. And if she fights it? With what money? Dad scoffed. She is house rich and cash poor. She puts every dime into that place. She can't afford a lawyer to fight a title dispute. She will just roll over. She always does. I ripped the headphones off my head and threw them onto the granite counter. They clattered loudly. A violent sound in the quiet kitchen. But I didn't care. I stood up and began to pace. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a terrifying rush of adrenaline. This wasn't just bad parenting. This wasn't just toxic family dynamics. This was a conspiracy to commit fraud. They were planning to leverage a personal connection in the government to bypass legal scrutiny. They were planning to steal my equity, almost $1 million of equity, by tricking or forcing me to sign a document I didn't understand. Or worse, by forging it and having their friend look the other way. I looked at the refrigerator, where the contractor's card still hung. Bates Construction. My father hadn't just been fantasizing about an addition. He had been preparing to spend the money he was going to steal from the equity line of credit. I went back to the laptop. I didn't close the audio file. Instead, I opened a new window. I created a new spreadsheet. I typed the header in bold. Capital letters. Operation Eviction. I created 3 columns: the lies, the truth, and the evidence. Under the lies, I typed Dad's heart risk and financial destitution. Under the truth, I typed they have a full pension and just bought a new truck 6 months ago. Under the evidence, I typed find the Facebook photos of the new truck, find the public records of their pension fund solvent status. I typed furiously. I documented the conversation about Jimmy. I wrote down the timestamp 12:38 p.m. Then, a memory hit me. A sharp, stinging recollection that made me stop typing mid-sentence. 2 weeks ago, I was at work. My phone pinged. A text from my mother. Hi, sweetie. Dad and I are looking at booking that family trip we talked about for next summer. Maybe a cruise I need to put our passport info in. Can you snap a picture of your driver's license and your passport data page and send it to me? Just need the numbers for the travel agent. I hadn't thought twice about it. I was in a meeting. I wanted to be helpful. I wanted the family trip to happen because I was still desperate for the fantasy of a happy family. I had walked out to the parking lot, taken the photos, and texted them to her. Thanks, she had replied. Love you. I stared at the screen. They weren't booking a cruise. They needed my identification details. They needed my exact signature from the license to practice. Or, more sinisterly, They needed the passport number and expiration date to fill out the notary forms that Jimmy was going to stamp without looking. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. They had everything. They had my address. They had my birth certificate. It was in their safe. They had copies of my ID. They had the emergency key to my house. And they had a friend in the county clerk's office. I was not just a daughter being manipulated. I was a victim of identity theft in slow motion. I grabbed my purse and dumped the contents onto the island. I found my wallet. I pulled out my credit cards. I pulled out my ID. I needed to secure the perimeter. I picked up my phone and dialed the number on the back of my primary bank card. "Custodial services," the automated voice said. "Please say your reason for calling." "Fraud," I said clearly. "Potential fraud." When the representative came on the line, a woman with a tired but kind voice named Sarah, I didn't tell her the whole sob story. I didn't tell her about the beige recliner or the phone call. I kept it to the facts, the Margot facts. "I believe my personal information has been compromised by a family member," I said. "I need to put a lock on my accounts. I need to set up a verbal password that is required for any transaction over $100. "Certainly, ma'am," Sarah said. "We can do that. What would you like the password to be?" I looked at the window, at the reflection of the woman standing in the dark kitchen. She looked harder than she had this morning. She looked like someone who was done paying rent. "Lavender," I said. "The password is lavender." "Okay, lavender. And do you want to freeze your credit inquiries?" "Yes," I said. "Every bureau, Equifax, TransUnion, Experian, lock them all down. Nobody opens a line of credit in my name, not for a car, not for a toaster, and definitely not for a home equity loan." After I hung up with the bank, I went back to the spreadsheet. I added a new tab, Assets. I listed everything: the house, the car, the savings account Margot had left me, the 401k I had started at my job. Then I listed liabilities. Under that, I wrote just one name: Darren and Lynn Bishop. They were the only debt I had. They were a toxic asset that was depreciating my life. I looked at the date on the corner of my screen. It was October 14th. My parents were due back from their trip on October 21st. 7 days. I had 1 week. 1 week to turn this house from a sitting duck into a fortress. I remembered the contractor saying, "He seemed to know everything." My father had done his homework. He knew the zoning. He knew the property value. He thought he was playing chess against a toddler. He didn't know the toddler had grown up. I opened a search engine. I typed in real estate attorney, conflict of interest, asset protection. I scrolled past the big firms with the billboards. I needed someone sharp, someone who understood that the law wasn't just about statutes. It was about warfare. I found a name, Nadia Wexler. Her website was minimalist, no smiling photos of families. Just black text on a white background: protect what is yours. Civil litigation and property law. I wrote an email. Subject: urgent asset protection. Potential title: fraud. Dear Ms. Wexler, I own a home at 420 Cedar Lane, valued at $980,000. I have evidence that my parents intend to fraudulently transfer the title to themselves within the next 10 days, using a contact at the county clerk's office. I have audio recordings of their conspiracy. I need to stop them. I need to secure my property. And I need to do it before they step off the plane next Tuesday. I am not looking for mediation. I am looking for a preemptive strike. Can you help Lila Bishop? I hit send. The whoosh sound of the email departing felt like a gunshot. I sat back in the chair. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't the terrified silence of the afternoon. It was the heavy, focused silence of a war room. My mother thought I was soft. She thought I would sign because I couldn't handle the guilt. She was right about one thing. I did feel guilt. I felt guilty that I had let it go on this long. I felt guilty that I had let Margot's sanctuary be invaded by their beige recliners and their toxic expectations. But that guilt was fuel now. I looked at the phone on the counter. The recording had finished playing. The cursor blinked at the end of the file. "She's a burden," my father had said. I saved the file to 3 different hard drives. I uploaded it to a cloud server with a password even the NSA would struggle to crack. You're right, Dad, I whispered to the empty room. I am a burden, and I am about to become the heaviest thing you have ever tried to carry. I closed the laptop. I didn't go to bed. I went to the closet and pulled out a box of trash bags. If they wanted to talk about cleaning house, I would show them what that really meant. Nadia Wexler's office did not look like a place where families were repaired. It looked like a place where they were surgically dismantled. Located on the 14th floor of a glass tower downtown, her office was a study in intimidation. The carpet was a severe charcoal gray. The desk was a slab of black marble that looked heavy enough to crush a person. And Nadia herself was sharp angles and terrifying competence. She was 40, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. And she read my email printout with the expression of a surgeon looking at a particularly interesting tumor. Let us be clear about the baseline. Lila, she said, sliding a document across the marble. It was a title search she had run 10 minutes before I arrived. This is the current deed. Who is listed? I looked at the paper. Lila Bishop. Only Lila Bishop, she corrected. Not Lila and Darren, not the Bishop Family Trust, just you. In the eyes of the law, your parents have the same rights to your property as a stranger walking down the street, which is to say, none. They think they do, I said. They are planning to file a quitclaim deed. They have a friend in the clerk's office. Nadia leaned back, tapping a silver pen against her chin. That moves this from a civil dispute to criminal fraud. But we are not going to wait for them to commit a crime. We are going to remove the asset from the board before they can even pick up the pen. She opened a fresh legal pad. Here is the strategy. We are going to treat this like a hostile corporate takeover. Except you are the corporation and they are the raiders. First, documentation. If they sue, and people like this always sue when the money tap runs dry, they will claim adverse possession or constructive trust. They will claim they contributed to the mortgage or the renovations. They bought a beige recliner, I said, and some paint. Good, Nadia said, not smiling. We need to prove that I want you to go home and photograph every single room, high resolution. I want a visual inventory. Then, I want you to go through your bank statements for the last 3 years. Highlight every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every property tax installment paid by you. Then, find any text messages where they mention visiting or staying over. We need to establish that they are guests. Lila, permanent guests, maybe, but guests, not co-owners. Okay, I said. I can do that. Second, she said, her voice dropping an octave. You are selling the house. Yes. Not just selling, she cautioned. You need to vanish. If you list this on the open market, they will see the sign. They will see the listing online. They will file a lis pendens a notice of pending legal action just to cloud the title and scare off buyers. They will sabotage the sale. So, how do I sell a house without anyone knowing it is for sale? I asked. Nadia handed me a business card. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock. Graham Pike, senior broker, Cedarvale Property Collective. Graham specializes in pocket listings, Nadia said. Off-market deals, high-net-worth clients who value privacy. He can move a property like yours in 48 hours to a buyer who does not care about inspections and pays in cash. Usually an LLC or a corporate trust. Your parents will not know the house is sold until the locks are changed. I took the card. It felt heavy in my hand. One last thing, Nadia said, standing up to signal the meeting was over. Do not say a word. Silence is not just safe, it is a trap. Let them think their plan is working. Let them think you are the same soft daughter they left behind. The more confident they are, the less they will look over their shoulders. I walked out of her office into the bright, cold sunlight of the city. I felt different, lighter. I wasn't Lila the victim anymore. I was Lila the client. I went straight to a coffee shop, but I didn't order coffee. I ordered the strongest Wi-Fi signal they had. I opened my laptop and logged into a credit monitoring service I had signed up for that morning. I typed in my social security number. The wheel spun on the screen. When the report loaded, I scrolled down to the section labeled Hard Inquiries. There it was, dated 2 days ago, First National Bank, inquiry type, home equity line of credit, status pending review. My breath hitched. They hadn't just talked about it, they had done it. My father, or his friend Jimmy-O, or someone, had already filled out an application using my name and social security number. They were trying to borrow $300,000 against my house while they were sipping cocktails on a cruise ship. I didn't panic. Panic is for people who don't have a plan. I called the 3 major credit bureaus. One by one, I placed a total freeze on my credit file. I set up a fraud alert. I told them that no application was to be approved without a verbal confirmation from me, using a burner phone number I had bought an hour ago at a convenience store. Then I logged into my bank. My primary checking account, the one my parents knew about, the one they sometimes borrowed from, was at a large national bank. I opened a new account at a credit union 3 towns over, a place where nobody knew the name Bishop. I initiated a transfer. I moved everything except for $200. I moved the savings Margot had left me. I moved my paycheck. I moved my emergency fund. I changed my direct deposit at work. I changed my passwords. I changed the security questions. No longer was the answer to, "What is your mother's maiden name?" Hale. Now, the answer was a string of random alphanumeric characters that I memorized on the spot. I was severing the digital umbilical cord. Next, I called Graham Pike. He agreed to meet me not at his office, but at a park halfway between my house and the city. He arrived in a black sedan that looked like it belonged to a government agency. Graham was a man in his 50s, with silver hair and a suit that looked comfortable but expensive. He didn't look like a salesman. He looked like a diplomat. We sat on a park bench. I handed him the photos of the house on a tablet. "It is a mid-century gem," Graham said, swiping through the images. "The market is starving for this, especially in that school district. I need $980,000, I said, "and I need it to be invisible." Graham nodded. He didn't ask why. People in his line of work didn't ask why. They just asked when. "I have a buyer in mind," he said softly. "An investment group out of Seattle. They buy properties to hold for executive rentals. They use a generic LLC for the purchase, Blue Horizon Holdings or something similar. Your name will not appear on public listing sites. The sale price will not be indexed until months after closing. Can we close in 6 days?" I asked. Graham looked at me. "That is aggressive." "My parents return from vacation on the 21st, I said. "I need to be gone before their plane touches the tarmac," Graham calculated. "If we skip the inspection, which we can, given the condition, and if the title is clean." "The title is clean," I said. "For now." "Then we can do it," Graham said. "I will have the paperwork drawn up tonight. The buyer will wire the funds into escrow on Monday morning. We record the deed on Tuesday. You hand over the keys at noon." "Done," I said. The drive home was surreal. I was selling my life. I was selling the walls that held my memories of Margot. But as I pulled into the driveway, I realized I wasn't selling Margot's memory. I was saving it. I was liquidating the asset so they couldn't corrupt it. Now came the hardest part. The physical extraction. I walked into the house. It was silent. The beige recliner sat in the middle of the living room, mocking me. I had bought 3 rolls of painter's tape, blue, green, and red. I started in the living room. Nadia had warned me, "Do not give them ammunition to call the police. Do not take anything that can be proven to be theirs." I looked at the recliner. I tore off a strip of red tape. I slapped it onto the leather. Theirs. I moved to the bookshelf. My books, the architecture textbooks, the novels. The travel guides got blue tape. Mine. The vase on the mantel that my mother had brought over 3 Christmases ago. Red tape. The china set in the dining room. That was tricky. It had been Margot's. Technically, it was mine. But my mother had always claimed Margot promised it to her. I stared at the delicate floral patterns. If I took it, my mother would scream theft. If I left it, she would smash it in a rage when she realized the house was sold. I put a piece of green tape on it. Disputed storage. I moved through the house like a forensic investigator. The kitchen, the bathroom, the spare bedrooms filled with their winter coats and boxes of old tax returns. It was nauseating to see how much of their debris had accumulated in my space. It was a physical manifestation of the emotional weight I had been carrying. Boxes of my father's old magazines, my mother's exercise equipment that she never used. I cataloged it all. I took photos of every item with red tape. I created a spreadsheet listing the item, the condition, and the location. Then I called the movers. Not a standard moving company, but a white glove service that specialized in difficult situations. I booked 2 trucks. Truck A was for me. It was going to my new apartment, a place I had leased online an hour ago in a complex with 24-hour security and keycard access. Truck B was for them. I drove to a self-storage facility on the edge of town. It was a clean, secure place with climate control. I walked into the office. "I need a 10 by 20 unit," I told the manager, "and I need to pay in advance." "How long?" he asked. 6 months, I said. I filled out the rental agreement. I put the unit in the name Darren and Lynn Bishop. I listed their home address, but I signed as the authorized payer. I paid cash, $900. It was a lot of money to spend on people who were trying to rob me. But it was cheaper than a lawsuit. It was an insurance policy. When they came screaming that I had stolen their property, I would hand them a key and a receipt. I didn't steal it. I preserved it. "Here is 6 months of free storage. You are welcome." I drove back to the house. It was dark now. I stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by objects marked with blue and red tape. It looked like a crime scene. And in a way, it was. I was killing the person I used to be. I looked at the phone on the kitchen counter. I checked the app. No new calls. They were probably at the buffet right now, toasting to their cleverness, toasting to the easy daughter who would sign the papers next week. I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. It was the calm of the hurricane's eye. They thought I was trapped in here with them. They thought silence meant submission. They didn't understand. I wasn't hiding. I was hunting. I picked up a marker and wrote on a box that contained my father's old bowling trophies. Fragile. I didn't write it because the trophies were breakable. I wrote it because his ego was, and I was about to drop it from a very great height. I went to bed that night on a mattress marked with blue tape. I slept better than I had in years. The clock was ticking. 4 days until closing. 5 days until they returned. My dad had forgotten to hang up. I was about to hang up for good. The ink on the contract was still wet when I looked at the clock on the wall of Graham Pike's office. It was 10 in the morning on a Monday. My parents were currently somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, sipping complimentary champagne in Economy Plus. Believing they were returning to a daughter who was ready to be harvested, they were wrong. They were returning to a ghost. "That is it," Graham said, sliding a thick envelope across the mahogany desk toward me. "The wire transfer has been initiated. $980,000, minus commissions and fees. Will hit your new credit union account within the hour. The deed is recorded. The title has transferred to Blue Horizon Holdings, LLC." I stared at the paperwork. It was just paper, a stack of wood pulp and ink, but it weighed less than the air I had been breathing for 34 years. "And the buyers?" I asked. "They are aware of the situation. They know the property is vacant as of noon tomorrow," Graham said. "They are sending a property management team to change the locks at 1 o'clock. They do not care about family drama. Lila. They care about possession. Once they change those locks, anyone trying to enter without a lease is trespassing. Even if their last name is Bishop." I nodded. "Thank you, Graham." I walked out of the office and into the final phase of the extraction. Nadia had timed it perfectly. The legal notices regarding the sale were filed in a way that satisfied the public record requirements, but wouldn't trigger a notification to the address until the deed was already done. My parents couldn't stop a sale that had already happened. They couldn't file an injunction against a transaction that was closed. They were bringing a knife to a gunfight, and the gunfight was already over. I drove back to the house for the last time. The driveway was full. I had hired 2 separate moving crews from 2 different companies to ensure there were no mix-ups. Crew A was a team of 3 burly men in blue shirts. They were handling the blue tape items my life. My clothes, my books, the furniture I had bought with my own money, the kitchen equipment I used. They were loading it into a 26-foot truck headed for my new apartment, a place 3 hours north in a town where I knew nobody, and nobody knew me. Crew B was 2 guys in red shirts. They were the red tape crew. Their job was the extraction of the infection. I stood in the living room, holding a clipboard, directing traffic like an air traffic controller. "The beige recliner," I said, pointing to my father's throne. "Red truck, be careful with it, but get it out." I watched them hoist the monstrosity. It looked pathetic as it tilted sideways to fit through the door. The friction of the fabric against the door frame made a sound like a zipper tearing. I felt a surge of vicious satisfaction. That chair had blocked the flow of my home for months. Now, it was heading to a 10 by 20 steel box on the other side of town. "The box is in the spare room," one of the red team asked. "All of it," I said. "Winter coats, the old tax files, the golf clubs. If it has a red sticker, it goes." The house was being surgically divided. It was a physical manifestation of the boundary I should have set 10 years ago. By 3 in the afternoon, the house was echoing. The rugs were gone. The art was off the walls, leaving pale rectangles where the sun hadn't hit the paint. I walked through the empty rooms. The kitchen, where I had heard the phone call, was stripped bare. The granite counter was just cold stone now. The faucet, the one that had started this entire war with its dripping, had been fixed by a plumber I hired 2 days ago. I wanted to leave the house in perfect condition for the new owners. I wasn't my parents. I respected property. I went to the garage. My car was packed with the essentials, a suitcase of clothes for the first week, my laptop, and a small, wooden box. I opened the box. Inside was a packet of lavender seeds Margot had given me the spring before she died, and a stack of handwritten letters she had sent me when I was in college. "Dear Lila," one of them began, "remember that a house is just walls. A home is where you can exhale." I closed the box. I was taking the home with me. I was leaving the walls for the LLC. There was one last piece of business. I walked over to the neighbor's fence. Mrs. Higgins was in her garden, deadheading her hydrangeas. She was 72, with eyes that missed nothing and a deep, abiding suspicion of my father, whom she once saw kick a stray cat. "Mrs. Higgins," I called out softly. She looked up, wiping her hands on her apron. She saw the moving trucks. She saw the emptiness in my eyes. She didn't look surprised. "Leaving, dear?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I sold the house." She paused, snipping a dead bloom. "Good. My parents return tomorrow evening," I said. "They don't know," Mrs. Higgins smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a woman who enjoyed a bit of justice. "I imagine they will be quite loud." "They might be," I said. "I just wanted to let you know, so you don't call the police on the movers. But if you see people trying to break in tomorrow night, well, do what you think is right. I have a very good view from my front porch," she said, "and I just bought new batteries for my hearing aid. I won't miss a thing." "Thank you for being kind to Margot," I said. "Margot was a queen," Mrs. Higgins said. "She would be proud of you. Lila, you look taller." I felt taller. I walked back to the house. The movers were closing the doors of the trucks. Crew A handed me a manifest. Crew B handed me the receipt for the storage unit. I took a thick manila envelope from my bag. On the front, I had written in black marker, "Darren and Lynn." Inside was the key to the storage unit at Safekeep Self-Storage. There was a map to the facility. There was the receipt showing 6 months of prepaid rent, and there was a note. I had agonized over the note for days. I had written drafts where I screamed at them, drafts where I explained how much they had hurt me, drafts where I quoted the recording. In the end, I deleted all of them. Explanations are for people who listen. My parents only heard what they wanted to hear. The note I put in the envelope was 3 sentences long. "The house is sold. Your belongings are in Unit 4B at Safekeep Storage. Paid for through April. Do not contact me." I taped the envelope to the front door. I used duct tape. I wanted to make sure it didn't blow away. I wanted it to be the first thing they saw when they walked up the path, dragging their suitcases, expecting to walk into their retirement plan. I took my phone out of my pocket. It was my old number, the one they had, the one they called to demand things. I had already transferred my contacts Nadia, Graham, Mrs. Higgins, and a few friends from college to a new phone with a new number and a new area code. I looked at the old phone. It had a voicemail notification. Probably my mother, checking in from the layover, making sure I had stocked the fridge with her favorite white wine. I didn't listen to it. I went into the settings. I did a factory reset. I watched the screen go black. Then the little logo spin as it erased years of data. Photos, texts, call logs, gone. I dropped the wiped phone into the kitchen trash can. It felt fitting. I walked to the front door. I stepped out onto the porch. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the lawn I had mowed for the last time. I locked the door. I tested the handle. It was secure. I took the house key off my ring. It was a brass key with a little rubber cover Margot had put on it years ago. I slid it into a lockbox Graham had attached to the railing for the new owners. I spun the dial. Click. It was the sound of a prison cell opening, not closing. I walked down the driveway to my car. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look back at the window where I used to sit and wait for them to leave. I didn't look back at the garden where Margot had taught me about roots. I got into my car. The engine started with a smooth hum. I merged onto the highway as the streetlights flickered on. The traffic was light. I was driving north, toward a small apartment that smelled like fresh paint and anonymity. I had no house. I had no parents. I had no history that I was dragging behind me anymore. I reached over to the passenger seat and touched the wooden box with the lavender seeds. My father had said I was a burden. I looked at the speedometer. I was doing 65 miles per hour. The road stretched out in front of me, wide and open and terrified and thrilling. I wasn't a burden. I was a bird that had finally chewed through its own leg to get out of the trap. And I was flying. I did not need to be there to see it. I had the best surveillance system in the suburbs, Mrs. Higgins and her freshly battered hearing aids. According to her report, the taxi pulled up to the curb at 6:17 in the evening. It was a Tuesday. The streetlights had just flickered on, casting long, orange shadows across the lawn that no longer belonged to me. My father, Darren, got out first. He did not look at the house with love. He looked at it with ownership. He stood with his hands on his hips, stretching his back, probably preparing a speech about how hard the flight was and how I should have had dinner ready on the table. My mother, Lynn, followed, dragging a suitcase that was too heavy for her, waiting for him to help. He did not help. He marched up the walkway, his boots clicking on the concrete, ready to reclaim his throne. I can only imagine the specific, hollow sound the key made. They still had their copies. The brass keys I had given them years ago. My father would have thrust his key into the lock with the confidence of a man who owned the world. He would have tried to turn it to the right. Clunk. The cylinder would not have budged. He probably jiggled it, pulled it out, blew on it, tried again. Harder this time. The anger would have started in his neck, a flush of red rising up past his collar. Lila. He would have shouted. Mrs. Higgins said he shouted it 3 times. Open the damn door, the lock is jammed. But the lock was not jammed. It was changed. It was a high-security deadbolt installed by the property management company of Blue Horizon Holdings, LLC. It was a lock that did not recognize his authority. Then, they saw the envelope. I had taped it with duct tape at eye level. The manila envelope with their names scrawled in black marker. Darren and Lynn. My mother must have ripped it down. She opened it. She found the map. She found the receipt. She found the key to Unit 4B at Safekeep Self-Storage, and she found my note. The house is sold. Do not contact me. Mrs. Higgins told me that my mother made a sound like a tire blowing out on the highway, a sharp, high-pitched shriek of disbelief. My father did not scream. He kicked the door. He kicked it so hard the sound echoed 3 houses down. You cannot sell this, he roared at the wood. It is my house. He ran to the living room window. He pressed his face against the glass, cupping his hands to shield the glare. He expected to see his beige recliner. He expected to see me cowering on the sofa. Instead, he saw emptiness. He saw vacuum lines on the carpet where the professional cleaners had been. He saw a house that had been scrubbed clean of his existence. That was when the digital assault began. I was sitting in my new apartment, 3 hours away. I had thrown my old phone in the trash, but I had ported the number to a cloud-based voicemail service so I could monitor their escalation without engaging. I sat at my desk, watching the audio files populate on my laptop screen. New voicemail, 6:22 post-meridian. I clicked play. Lila. It was my father. He was breathless. Pick up the phone. Right now. The key isn't working, and some joke is taped to the door. I don't know what kind of game you're playing. But it ends now. Open the door. I need to use the bathroom and I'm hungry. You have 5 seconds. He hung up. He still thought it was a mistake. He thought I was inside, pouting. He thought he could command the door to open with his voice. New voicemail. 6:35 post-meridian. My mother this time. Her voice was trembling, pitching up into that worried victim register she used so well. Lila. Sweetie. We are so worried. We are outside. The house it looks empty. Did something happen? Did someone make you leave? Please, baby, call us. We just want to know you are safe. We can fix this. Just come open the door. She was trying to bypass the lock with guilt. She was trying to make me feel like I had abandoned them in the cold. New voicemail. 7:10 post-meridian. The tone had shifted. The sun had gone down. The reality had set in. They had probably called the police, and the police had probably told them that the property records showed a legal sale and that they had no right to be there. My father's voice was low, venomous. You ungrateful little bitch. I flinched. Even from 3 hours away, the hate in his voice had a physical weight. You sold it, he spat. You sold our house. After everything we did for you, you stole my equity. That money was mine. You think you can just run away. You think you can hide. I made you, and I will break you. You better fix this. Lila. You better undo this sale by tomorrow morning or I will rain hell on you. I saved the file. I renamed it Evidence Threat 001. I did not sleep well that night, but I slept safely. I knew where the door was, and I knew who held the key. The next morning, the war moved from my front porch to my professional life. I worked as a senior architect at Cedarvale Property Collective. It was a large, multidisciplinary firm, half development, half design, with a brokerage arm where Graham Pike worked. It was a sleek, glass-walled building that projected order and success. It was the one place my parents knew I could be found. I had arrived early, at 7 in the morning. I went straight to the head of security, a man named Marcus. I showed him the pictures. I showed him the restraining order application I was drafting. If they show up, I told him, do not let them up to the design floor, but do not physically engage them unless you have to. Just record it. They showed up at 10:15. I was at my desk on the 4th floor when my internal messenger pinged. It was the receptionist in the lobby. They are here. They are screaming. I walked to the glass railing that overlooked the atrium lobby. I stood back, hidden by a large potted ficus, and looked down. From up here, they looked small. In my childhood kitchen, they had been giants, but in the vast, polished lobby of Cedarvale, with its 30-foot ceilings and marble floors, they looked like chaotic specks. My father was slamming his hand on the reception desk. He was wearing the same clothes he had worn on the plane. He looked disheveled and manic. I want to see her, he was shouting. His voice carried up the atrium. Get Lila Bishop down here. She is an employee here, and she is a thief. The receptionist, a young woman named Chloe who was tougher than she looked, stood her ground. Sir, I need you to lower your voice or I will call the police. Call them? My mother screamed. She was crying, but it was the angry, red-faced crying of a toddler who has been denied candy. She stole our home. She left her parents on the street. Is that the kind of person you employ? A predator. People were stopping. Clients in suits. Brokers with coffee cups, they were all watching. My parents thought they were exposing me. They thought that by making a scene, they would shame me into submission, but they didn't understand the corporate world. In this world, emotion wasn't currency, it was a liability. They weren't making me look bad, they were making themselves look unstable. "She committed fraud," my father yelled, pointing a finger at a random security guard who was approaching. "She sold a house that belonged to the family. She forged my consent." I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was Graham Pike. He was down there. Stepping out of the brokerage office, I watched Graham approach them. He was calm, his suit immaculate. He held up a hand. "Mr. Bishop," Graham said. His voice was smooth, professional, and loud enough for everyone to hear. "I handled the sale of the property on Cedar Lane. The title was clean. The seller was the sole owner. There was no fraud. The only illegal activity happening right now is your trespassing in this lobby." My father turned purple. He lunged toward Graham. You helped her rob us." Marcus, the head of security, stepped in. He didn't shout. He just placed his large frame between my father and Graham. He pointed to the ceiling, where the black domes of the security cameras blinked. "Sir," Marcus said, "everything you are saying and doing is being recorded. You have threatened an employee. You are disrupting business. You are now banned from this property. If you do not leave in 30 seconds, you will be arrested for criminal trespass and disorderly conduct." My mother grabbed my father's arm. She saw the cameras. She saw the phones of bystanders raised, recording the meltdown. The shame she tried to weaponize was boomeranging back to her. "Darren," she hissed. "The cameras." My father looked around. He looked wild. He looked up at the balcony, scanning the glass railings. For a second, his eyes seemed to lock onto the ficus plant where I was hiding. He pointed a shaking finger at the ceiling. "This isn't over," he screamed. "You hear me? Lila, you don't get to walk away. You owe us." They were escorted out by Marcus and 2 other guards. I watched the revolving door spin them out onto the sidewalk. I let out a breath I'd been holding for 20 years. 10 minutes later, I was in the conference room with Graham. He handed me a USB drive. "Security footage," he said. "Audio and video, high definition. He threatened you. He threatened me. And he admitted to harassing you in front of 20 witnesses. I am sorry they came here," I said. "I am sorry for the scene." "Don't be," Graham said. "It was the final nail." People like that, they rely on the silence of the home. They rely on no one seeing the abuse. They just turned the lights on themselves. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text message, not a voicemail, a text. It was from my father. "We know where you work. We know you are scared. You should be. If you don't want us coming back every day and screaming until you get fired, you will meet us, today, 4 o'clock, at the Blackwood Cafe on 4th. Just us. No lawyers. You explain yourself. And maybe we don't sue you for elder abuse." I looked at the text. It was a classic extortion tactic. "Meet my demands, or I will destroy your reputation." But he had made a fatal error. He had put the threat in writing, and he had done it after I had video evidence of him already trying to destroy my reputation. I forwarded the screenshot to Nadia Wexler, added to the file. She replied instantly, "This is excellent. Lila, he is digging his own grave with a shovel made of texts. Do you want to meet him?" I thought about it. I didn't have to go. I could get the restraining order right now based on the lobby incident. I could disappear into my new life and never see their faces again. But there was something unfinished. The narrative was still theirs, in their heads. I was a thief. I was ungrateful. They genuinely believed their own lies. I needed to look them in the eye one last time. Not as a daughter, not as a victim, but as a witness for the prosecution. I needed to deliver the evidence personally. I needed to show them that the burden had become the judge. Yes, I typed back to Nadia. "I will meet them. But I'm not going alone. I am taking the truth with me." I looked at the time. It was 1 o'clock. I had 3 hours to prepare for the most important meeting of my life. I went to the printer. I printed the call logs. I printed the spreadsheet of their debts. I printed the transcript of the "she is a burden" call. I put it all in a binder. A black binder. I wasn't bringing a weapon. I was bringing a mirror. And I was going to force them to look into it. The Blackwood Cafe was not a place for family reunions. It was a place for business deals and breakups. It was loud, industrial, and filled with the kind of ambient noise steaming milk wands, indie rock, and chatter that provided perfect cover for a conversation that could end in a criminal indictment. I arrived 15 minutes late. I watched them from the window across the street before I went in. They were sitting at a small table near the back, but not in a corner. My father, Darren, was vibrating with impatient rage. He kept checking his watch, then checking the door, his leg bouncing under the table. My mother, Lynn, looked smaller than usual. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, likely to hide swollen eyes, but she kept taking them off to scan the room, looking for an audience she could perform for. I checked my own reflection in a shop window. I was wearing a tailored blazer and dark jeans. I did not look like the girl who tightened faucets and apologized for existing. I looked like a woman who had just negotiated a $1 million contract, which, in a way, I had. I walked in. The bell above the door chimed. I did not wave. I walked straight to their table. I did not sit down immediately. I stood there for a moment, letting them look up at me. "You are late," my father snapped. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was. He went straight to the grievance. "I am on a tight schedule," I said, pulling out the metal chair opposite them. It scraped loudly against the concrete floor. I sat down. I placed my phone face up on the table. Then, I placed the black binder next to it. "What is this?" my father asked, eyeing the binder. "We said no lawyers." "There are no lawyers here," I said. "Just me and the truth." "Lila," my mother started. Her voice was breathy, trembling. She reached across the table to touch my hand. I pulled my hand back, placing it in my lap. She flinched as if I had slapped her. "Lila, please, this has all gone too far. We are family. You cannot just sell the house. You cannot just lock us out. We were so worried about you." "Worried," I repeated flatly. "Yes, worried," my father hissed. He leaned in, lowering his voice so the barista wiping the next table wouldn't hear. "You are acting unstable, irrational, selling a family asset without consulting the head of the family that proves you are not capable of managing your own affairs." "The head of the family?" I said. I looked him in the eye. "That is an interesting title for a man who does not own the property. I built that life for you." He slammed his hand on the table. A few people looked over. He lowered his hand but kept the glare. "We sacrificed everything, and you throw us out like trash for what? Because of a misunderstanding." "Is that what it is?" I asked. "A misunderstanding. Of course it is," my mother said quickly. "You probably heard something, or thought you heard something. You have always been sensitive, Lila. You take things the wrong way. We were just trying to help you manage the estate. It is a big responsibility. We wanted to share the load." "Share the load?" I said. "By putting your names on the deed." "To protect you," my father insisted. "If you get sued, if you get married and divorced, we were insulating the asset. It is standard financial planning." "God, you are so dramatic." I looked at them. They were perfect. The performance was flawless. If I didn't know better, if I didn't have the digital files burning a hole in my hard drive, I might have believed them. I might have felt that old familiar ache of guilt, but the ache was gone. "So," I said, keeping my voice level, "you never called me a burden. You never planned to use a friend in the county clerk's office to bypass the notary requirements. You never talked about taking out a home equity line of credit to fund your retirement." They froze. My mother's mouth opened slightly. My father's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you are talking about," my father said. The denial was instant, reflexive. "You are making things up. You are paranoid." "Yeah," I said. "I thought you might say that." I reached for my phone. I tapped the screen. I did not use headphones. I turned the volume all the way up. The cafe was loud, but my phone was louder. She is a burden. Lynn, she really is. My father's voice cut through the smell of roasted coffee. It was unmistakable. My mother gasped. My father turned pale. I let it play. We just need to get through the next few months. We get her to sign the deed over. You just have to press the guilt button. I am 64 years old. I deserve to relax next year. The deed, Jimmy said. If we bring the quitclaim deed in on a Friday afternoon, he won't scrutinize the notary stamp. I watched their faces as their own voices dismantled their defense. My mother looked down at her hands. My father stared at the phone as if it were a bomb he wanted to defuse but didn't know how. I hit pause right after the part about the $300,000. The silence at our table was heavy. It was a physical thing, pressing against our eardrums. That, my father stammered, that was taken out of context. We were venting. We were stressed. Context, I asked. The context was you planning to steal $1 million property from your daughter because you feel entitled to a return on your investment. It is not stealing if it is family, my father shouted. He forgot where he was. He forgot the crowd. It is our money. We raised you. We fed you. You owe us. I owe you for a childhood. I asked. I didn't ask to be born. Dad, you chose to have a child. Feeding me wasn't charity. It was the law. You are ungrateful, he spat. You are a cold, heartless bitch, just like your grandmother. Thank you, I said. I opened the black binder. You said you were just venting, I said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. It was a printout from the credit bureau. So explain this. My father looked at the paper. This is a hard inquiry on my credit report, I said. From First National Bank, for a home equity line of credit, dated 2 days before you came home, you initiated a loan application on a house you do not own, using my social security number. He started. I was just checking rates. You were committing identity theft, I said, and bank fraud. That is a federal crime. Dad, punishable by up to 30 years in prison. My mother grabbed his arm. She looked terrified now. The gaslighting hadn't worked. The guilt trip hadn't worked. Now they were staring at the barrel of a felony charge. Lila, she whispered, you wouldn't. We are your parents. That is the only reason the police are not at this table right now, I said. But that changes today. I flipped the page in the binder. I revealed a still image printed from a video. It was my father, red-faced and screaming, pointing a finger at Graham Pike in the lobby of Cedar Vale. And this, I said, this is you yesterday, threatening my colleagues, disrupting my workplace, harassing me. I was angry. My father defended himself, but his voice was weaker now. You stole my house. It was never your house, I said. And now, it isn't my house either. It belongs to an investment firm. It is gone. The asset is liquidated. The money is in an account you cannot touch. In a bank you will never find. My father slumped back in his chair. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a sullen, defeated reality. He realized the money was truly gone. The easy retirement, the Florida condo, the status, it had all evaporated because he forgot to hang up a phone. So what now? He muttered. You leave us with nothing. We sold our furniture. We gave up our lease on the apartment. We have nowhere to go. You have a storage unit, I said. Paid for 6 months, and you have your pension. The pension isn't enough, he snapped. Then you will have to budget, I said. Margot taught me how. I'm sure you can figure it out. I stood up. I picked up my phone. I left the binder on the table. That binder contains copies of everything, I said. The audio transcript, the credit inquiry, the video frames. My lawyer, Nadia Wexler, has the originals. Lawyer. My mother wept. Why does it have to be lawyers? Because you made it criminal, I said. Here is how it works from now on. You do not call me. You do not email me. You do not come to my office. If you try to contact me, Nadia will file for an immediate restraining order. She will attach the evidence of the fraud and the workplace harassment. The judge will grant it. You are cutting us off, my mother asked. Just like that. After 34 years. I am not cutting you off, I said. I am setting you free. You said I was a burden. Well, congratulations. You are burden-free. I turned to walk away. Lila, my mother called out. She stood up, her chair screeching. Lila, wait. Where are we supposed to go? We have no home. I stopped. I turned back. The cafe had gone quiet. People were watching, but I didn't care about the audience anymore. I only cared about the two people who had taught me that love was a transaction. My mother stood there, wringing her hands, looking lost. For a second, I saw the woman who used to make me soup when I was sick. I saw the woman who used to braid my hair. But then I remembered the recording. Push a little, she'll sign. Where do we go? She asked again, tears streaming down her face. I looked at her. I looked at my father, who was staring at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. I don't know, I said. My voice was calm, steady, and final. I carried the weight of that question my entire life. I worried about your happiness, your bills, your moods, and your future every single day. I held up the sky for you so you wouldn't get wet. I took a deep breath. It is your turn to hold it up, I said. Figure it out. I walked out of the Blackwood Cafe. I stepped onto the sidewalk. The air was cold and crisp. The city sounds rushed back in sirens, horns, laughter. I checked my phone. No new messages. I began to walk. I didn't know exactly where I was going for dinner. I didn't know what I was going to do next weekend. But for the first time in 34 years, the itinerary was mine. They say that when an animal is trapped, it fights the hardest right before it dies. My parents were not dying, but their lifestyle was, and they were thrashing against the inevitability of it with a violence that was both pathetic and dangerous. The first legal strike arrived on a Thursday morning. It was not a polished document from a high-rise firm like Nadia's. It was a messy, chaotic filing from a strip mall lawyer named Saul Berkowitz, a man whose billboards I had seen advertising injury settlements next to highway exits. Nadia called me into her office to review it. She held the complaint with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. They are throwing spaghetti at the wall, Lila, she said. They are suing for constructive trust, unjust enrichment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They are claiming that they had a verbal contract with you, a promise that in exchange for raising you, the house would eventually revert to them. That is insane, I said. Raising a child is a legal obligation, not a down payment. Agreed, Nadia said. But they are also claiming tenancy rights. They say they have lived there part-time for years, stored property there, and contributed to the maintenance. They are asking for a stay on the sale proceeds and right of re-entry. They bought paint once, I said. And a chair. We will crush the tenancy claim, Nadia said. I have drafted a response. We are submitting the utility bills all in your name, the property tax records all in your name, and the bank statements showing 0 rent payments from them. In the eyes of the law, they were guests who overstayed their welcome, not tenants with rights. But the lawsuit was just the distraction. The real attack was happening in the shadows. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was Graham Pike. He sounded tense. Lila, he said, we have a problem with the buyers. My stomach dropped. What happened? Your parents contacted Blue Horizon Holdings, Graham said. I do not know how they got the contact information. Probably dug through public records for the LLC's registered agent. They called the investment manager directly. They told him that the sale is invalid because the seller you is mentally incompetent. The room spun. They said what? They claimed you are suffering from a manic episode, Graham continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. They told the buyers that you have a history of instability and that you sold the house during a breakdown without the consent of your guardians. They threatened to drag the LLC into a competency hearing if the sale was not reversed. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was an assassination of my character. They were willing to burn my professional reputation and my sanity just to get their claws back into the money. Did the buyers believe them? I asked. Blue Horizon are sharks, Lila. They do not care about feelings, but they hate liability. They have paused the final release of the contingency funds. They want assurance that the title is bulletproof. Fix it, I said. I will sign an affidavit of sanity. I will get a doctor's note, whatever it takes. I am handling it, Graham said. But you need to know your parents are not just trying to get the house back. They are trying to destroy you. I hung up and called Nadia immediately. It is time to take the gloves off, I told her. File the counterclaims. Everything. Nadia didn't argue. She sent a cease and desist letter to my parents and their lawyer that was so blistering it practically smoked. She attached the logs of my father's harassment at my workplace. She attached the audio transcript of the threats. She attached a formal notice that any further contact with Blue Horizon Holdings would be considered tortious interference with a business contract. But my parents had one more card to play. And it was a card I didn't see coming. 2 days later, during the discovery exchange for the lawsuit, their lawyer submitted a document labeled Exhibit A Intent to Transfer Deed. Nadia emailed it to me. Lila, look at this immediately. Did you sign this? I opened the PDF. It was a single page, dated 8 months ago. It was a poorly typed document stating that I, Lila Bishop, hereby agree to transfer 50% ownership of the property at 420 Cedar Lane to Darren and Lynn Bishop in consideration of future care and estate planning. At the bottom of the page was a signature, Lila Bishop. I stared at it. My breath caught in my throat. It looked like my signature, the loop of the L, the sharp slant of the B. It was terrifyingly similar to the way I signed my checks, but I had never seen this document in my life. I called Nadia. I didn't sign it. It is a forgery. Are you sure? Nadia asked. It is notarized. I looked closer at the PDF. There, next to the signature, was a stamp. James O'Connell, Notary Public, Jimmy, the drinking buddy, the man my father had mentioned on the recording. Jimmy said if we bring the deed in, he won't scrutinize the stamp. It is Jimmy, I told Nadia. My dad's friend. He is the notary. They forged my signature and he stamped it. Okay, Nadia said, her voice shifting into attack mode. If they submitted a forged document to the court, they just handed us a win, but we have to prove it. Where were you on February 12th of this year? That is the date on the document. I scrambled to open my calendar. February 12th. I scrolled back. I was at work, I said. Wait, no. I stared at the entry. A slow smile spread across my face. I wasn't at work, I said. I was in Denver. I was at the National Sustainable Architecture Conference. I have the flight receipts. I have the hotel bill. I have photos of me standing on a stage giving a presentation at the exact time this document was supposedly signed and notarized in our hometown. Got them, Nadia said. Send me everything. Lila, this is fraud. This is perjury. We are going to nail them to the wall. But the investigation didn't stop there. Nadia hired a private investigator to look into the notary stamp. It turned out Jimmy had been sloppy. The logbook for that day showed no entry for me. Furthermore, the investigator found a witness, a receptionist at a local copy shop, who remembered my father coming in 2 weeks prior, asking questions about how to trace a signature and if carbon paper still worked for legal forms. He hadn't just forged it. He had planned the forgery in public. While we were building the fraud case, my parents decided to launch a moral offensive. They knew they were losing the legal ground, so they went for the emotional jugular. They filed an amended affidavit claiming that the debt I owed them wasn't just abstract. They listed medical expenses they had paid for me as a child, a broken arm when I was 7, asthma treatments when I was 10. They claimed these costs had decimated their savings, forcing them into their current financial precarity. It was the ultimate guilt trip. We are poor because we kept you alive. I felt a pang of sickness reading it. It was so low. But then, the architect in me took over. I looked at the dates of the alleged medical financial ruin. July, 1998, the summer of my asthma attacks. I went to the box of old photos I had saved from the blue tape pile. I found an album. There they were, July 1998, my parents, tanned and smiling, holding cocktails on a beach in Hawaii. They had gone for 2 weeks while I stayed with Margot. I dug deeper. I found Margot's old financial ledgers, which I had kept in the safe. Margot had been meticulous. There was a check stub, dated July 10th, 1998, paid to Darren Bishop. Memo. Lila's medical deductible reimbursement. Margot had paid them. She had covered the cost. And they had taken the money, gone to Hawaii, and were now, 30 years later, trying to bill me for it again. I scanned the photo of them in Hawaii. I scanned Margot's check stub. I sent them to Nadia. Exhibit B, the lie. I typed, the final blow to my isolation came from the extended family. My parents, realizing the court case was crumbling, had taken to the phones. They called my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. They told a sob story about how I had thrown them out on the street, how I was abusive, how I had been brainwashed by a predatory lawyer. I started getting messages. Lila, how could you, from Aunt Sarah? Your father is crying. You need to fix this. From Cousin Mike. I didn't reply. I didn't try to defend myself. I realized that anyone who believed my parents' sudden victimhood without asking for my side wasn't someone I wanted in my life. I blocked them, one by one. It was lonely. It felt like I was amputating a limb, but the limb was gangrenous. We need the restraining order, Nadia said on Friday. The harassment at work, the contact with the buyer, the forgery, the smear campaign, it is enough. We are not just asking for a dismissal of their lawsuit. We are asking for an order of protection. Do it, I said. The paperwork was filed. We included everything. The video of the lobby meltdown, the text message extortion, the proof of the forgery, the fraudulent credit inquiry. We served them on a Monday. According to the process server, my father didn't scream this time. He just turned gray. He looked at the stack of evidence, the stack that proved he was not a victim, but a criminal, and he slumped against the doorframe of the cheap motel room they were staying in. They had been staying in a motel because they refused to use the storage unit money to rent an apartment. They wanted to appear homeless to the court, but we had evidence of the prepaid storage unit too. The court date was set for the following Wednesday. It was a hearing for the preliminary injunction and the dismissal of their lawsuit. I spent the night before the hearing in my new apartment. It was quiet. I didn't have a beige recliner blocking my path. I didn't have to listen for the sound of keys in the lock. I looked at the binder, my black binder of truth. They had tried to use the past to control me. They had tried to use my own memories as a weapon, but they had forgotten that memories, when examined under the light of adulthood, revealed different things. They revealed that the sacrifices were transactions. They revealed that the love was a loan with high interest. They revealed that the burden wasn't me, it was them. I put on my suit. I looked in the mirror. Tomorrow, I wasn't just going to court to win a lawsuit. I was going to court to finalize the divorce from my parents. They wanted a hearing, they were going to get one. And this time, they wouldn't be able to talk over me. This time, the timestamp would speak. I went to sleep, and for the first time in my life, I didn't dream about them. I dreamt about an empty field, wide and open, waiting for me to build something new. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a smell I used to associate with justice, but as I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Nadia Wexler, I realized it smelled more like bureaucracy. It smelled like the friction of paper against lives. My parents, Darren and Lynn Bishop, sat at the defense table. They had dressed for the occasion. My father was wearing a cardigan I had never seen before, a soft, oatmeal-colored wool that made him look like a harmless, kindly grandfather. My mother was wearing a floral dress with a high collar, her hair pulled back in a modest bun. She held a tissue in her hand, twisting it, shredding it, preparing to dab at eyes that were currently dry. They looked like the victims. They looked like two sweet old people who had been thrown out into the snow by a heartless, corporate daughter. It was a costume, a very specific disguise designed to trigger the sympathy reflex of the Honorable Judge Evelyn Vance. Their lawyer, Mr. Berkowitz, stood up first. He adjusted his tie, which was slightly crooked, and launched into an opening statement that was less about the law and more about a Hallmark movie gone wrong. "Your Honor," he began, his voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "This is not a case about real estate. This is a case about elder abuse. This is a case about two loving parents who poured their life savings, their sweat, and their souls into a home for their daughter, only to be evicted without notice. They are homeless, Your Honor. They are living in a motel while their daughter sits on a pile of cash." He pointed at me. My father slumped his shoulders on cue. My mother let out a small, audible sob. It was a good performance. I felt the eyes of the bailiff on me. I felt the weight of the narrative shifting. Nadia did not flinch. She did not look at me. She simply waited for Berkowitz to finish his emotional plea. When he sat down, looking satisfied, Nadia stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not point fingers. She simply picked up the black binder. "Your Honor," Nadia said, her voice crisp and cool like shattered ice. "The defense tells a compelling story, but a courtroom is not a library for fiction. It is a place for facts, and the facts of this case are simple. My client, Lila Bishop, was the sole owner of the property. She sold it legally. The defendants, Darren and Lynn Bishop, were guests who overstayed their welcome and are now attempting to extort their daughter through harassment and fraud." Judge Vance looked over her spectacles. "Extortion is a strong word, Counselor." "I have strong evidence," Nadia replied. The hearing began. My parents took the stand first. My father testified that he had invested in the house through cash payments to me over the years. Though he could produce no receipts, he claimed there was a verbal agreement that the house was a family asset. "She looked me in the eye," my father said, looking at the judge with his best honest man expression. "She said, 'Dad, this house is as much yours as it is mine.' We trusted her." "And the harassment allegations?" the judge asked. "Misunderstandings," my father said, shaking his head sadly. "I was upset. Who wouldn't be? I went to her office to beg her to reconsider. I was emotional. I never threatened anyone." Then it was my mother's turn. She cried. She talked about my childhood asthma. She talked about the sacrifices they made. She painted a picture of a spoiled, ungrateful child who took everything and gave nothing back. "We just want to be a family again," she wept. "We just want to go home." It was heavy. The air in the room felt thick with their version of the truth. I saw the judge softening, tilting her head with sympathy. Then, it was my turn. I walked to the stand. I placed my hand on the Bible. I swore to tell the truth. Nadia walked up to the podium. "Ms. Bishop," she said, "why did you sell the house without telling your parents?" The room went silent. This was the question. This was the hinge the entire case swung upon. I looked at my parents. My father was glaring at me, a warning in his eyes. My mother was looking down, the tissue shredded in her lap. "I sold it," I said, my voice steady, "because on October 14th, at 12:34 in the afternoon, my father called me to ask for a warranty paper, and he forgot to hang up the phone." Nadia nodded. "And what did you hear?" "I heard them discussing a plan to force me to sign over the deed." I said, "I heard them discussing how to manipulate me using guilt, and I heard my father say 5 words that changed my life." I looked directly at my father. He said, "She is a burden." My father's face turned red. He opened his mouth to object, but his lawyer put a hand on his arm. "I realized then," I continued, turning back to the judge, "that I had spent 34 years trying to carry them. I carried their emotions. I carried their financial mistakes. I carried their happiness, and they called me a burden for it. So, I decided to put the burden down." Nadia turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we would like to play Exhibit C, the audio recording of that call." The judge nodded. The bailiff pressed play on the laptop connected to the courtroom speakers. My father's voice, loud and clear, filled the room. The acoustics of the courtroom made it sound even harsher than it had in my kitchen. "She is a burden. Lynn, she really is. Just need to get through the next few months. Next year, the deed. I watched the judge's face. The sympathy vanished. Her lips thinned. She listened to the entire 6 minutes. She listened to the part about Jimmy in the clerk's office. She listened to the plan to take out a loan. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. Mr. Berkowitz, Judge Vance said, her voice dropping 20 degrees. Your client just testified under oath that he never planned to take the house. That recording suggests perjury. Your Honor, Berkowitz stammered, sweating now. It was venting. It was private conversation. It is evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, the judge snapped. We have more, Nadia said. Your Honor, the defense has submitted a document, Exhibit A, claiming to be an agreement signed by Ms. Bishop to transfer the deed. It is dated February 12th of this year. Yes, the judge said, shuffling the papers. I see it. Ms. Bishop? Nadia asked me. Did you sign this document? No, I said. Where were you on February 12th? I was in Denver, Colorado, I said. At an architecture conference. Nadia projected an image onto the screen. It was a flight manifest, a hotel receipt, and a time-stamped photo of me standing on a stage in Denver, pointing at a slide about sustainable concrete. Unless Ms. Bishop has the ability to bilocate, Nadia said. She could not have signed a document in this county on that date. Furthermore, we have an affidavit from the receptionist at a local copy shop stating that Mr. Bishop came in 2 weeks prior, asking how to trace signatures. The judge looked at the document. Then she looked at my father. Mr. Bishop? The judge said. The Yashko. Her voice was terrifyingly quiet. Did you forge this signature? My father stood up. I had power of attorney in spirit. Sit down, the judge barked. That is a yes. The atmosphere in the room shifted from civil court to criminal inquest. My parents were no longer the poor, displaced elderly couple. They were con artists who had been caught mid-con. And finally, Nadia said, driving the last nail into the coffin, the harassment. The defense claims it was a misunderstanding. She played the video from the Cedar Vale lobby. My father screaming. My father threatening to rain hell. My father lunging at Graham Pike. The judge watched it. She took off her glasses. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. Enough, she said. She looked at my parents. My mother was sobbing for real now, her face buried in her hands. My father was staring at the table, his jaw working, his face the color of ash. In 20 years on the bench, Judge Vance said, I have seen many family disputes, but I have rarely seen such a calculated, malicious attempt to exploit a child. She turned to my father. Mr. Bishop, you came into my courtroom asking for equity. You claimed you were a victim. The evidence shows that you are a predator. You attempted to steal your daughter's property. You forged legal documents. You harassed her at her place of employment. You committed perjury on my stand. My father shrank. He looked small in his oatmeal cardigan now. The costume didn't work. I am dismissing the plaintiff's suit with prejudice, the judge ruled. There is no constructive trust. There is no tenancy. The house was Lila Bishop's to sell, and she sold it. You are entitled to nothing. She picked up a pen and signed a document with a sharp, aggressive stroke. I am granting the defendant's request for a permanent order of protection. Mr. and Mrs. Bishop, you are to have no contact with Lila Bishop. You will not go within 500 feet of her home or her workplace. You will not call, text, email, or send third parties to contact her. She looked up, locking eyes with my father. And regarding the forged deed and the admission of conspiracy on the tape, she added, I am forwarding the transcript of these proceedings and the evidence exhibits to the district attorney's office. They will decide whether to pursue criminal charges for forgery and attempted fraud. I suggest you get a criminal defense lawyer. You are going to need one. Your Honor, my mother wailed, we have nowhere to go. You have a storage unit, the judge said coldly, and you have your freedom. For now, I suggest you use it to find a job and pay for your own lives. Case closed. The gavel banged. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It sounded like a chain snapping. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but my spine was steel. I watched my parents. They didn't look at me. They were arguing with their lawyer, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. My father looked defeated, old and bitter. My mother looked terrified. They were not monsters under the bed anymore. They were just two people who had made a bad bet and lost. I didn't say anything to them. There was nothing left to say. The recording had said it all. The receipts had said it all. I turned to Nadia. "Thank you," I said. "You did this," Nadia said, closing the black binder. "I just filed the paperwork." You stood up. I walked out of the courtroom. The double doors swung open, and I stepped into the hallway. It was bright. Sunlight was streaming through the high windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air just like in the kitchen that day, but different. These dust motes weren't stagnant. They were moving. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out. It was a text from Nadia, who was still inside packing up. "You are safe. They cannot touch you. It is over." I reached into my pocket. My hand closed around a small, cold piece of metal. It was the key to my new apartment. It wasn't a grand house. It didn't have a garden yet. It didn't have $1 million of equity. But it had a lock that only I could open. I took a deep breath. The air tasted like floor wax and freedom. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking on the marble floor, a steady, rhythmic sound. Click, click, click. It wasn't a countdown anymore. It was a march forward. I had won. Not because I hurt them, not because I took revenge, but because for the first time in my life, I had chosen Lila, and she was worth every penny. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on Lila's decision. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help more people hear about how silence can be the loudest weapon of all.